We are in Montreal. Today is February 11 of 2020. Can you give us your name and what you like to do in life?
Well, my name is Don Ritter, and what I like to do in life is to create sort of large video sound installations that are controlled either by live music, by voice, by various sensors. Currently, my work is focusing on the control of video sound with specific body gestures in which your arms, your legs, your head, or whatever, actually their position in 3D space can control some aspect of the video and sound.
And can you choose one or two of your works that have been relevant, important for you, either for your career or for personal reasons?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my most widely exhibited work is a sound installation that I created in 1993. This installation is a completely dark room. Usually it is approximately 15 by 12 meters, and it is really a light lock room, and all you see in that room is a small exit sign. Now, when people walk into this space, they then hear 4 lanes of car traffic. That traffic is being created by 4 pairs of speakers that are facing each other, so they can create the illusion of a car traveling across the room. Now, if a person enters the space and they stand in front of the car, when the car approaches, then that car would screech to a halt, just as if they were walking down an actual street. If they then move out of the path of the car, subsequent cars will come, if they move out of the path of the car will then continue across the room, or technically through the other speaker. Now, if they remain standing in front of that idling car for a few seconds, another car will come behind that car and smash into the parked car, and that will continue happening until the person walks out of the lane. So each lane operates independently. Each lane has a different collection of cars, so you can have hundreds of people inside of this installation. Now, this work, I estimate now, has been experienced by maybe 800,000 people in 15 cities in Europe and Asia and North America. This piece, though, it has a certain, I guess, verisimilitude to it, in that it is very emotional. When it was initially shown, some people are screaming inside, some people are laughing hysterically. Other people cannot actually walk into this work, in some cases because themselves or people they know may have been in a car accident. And the piece brings up these very, very strong emotions inside of it. I think one of the reasons is not simply because of the sound of cars, it's because it is a completely dark room. And once you do that, the emotional reaction to the sound is really amplified.
Let's switch from sound in some way to your large shows with video projections on large buildings. For example, if you can choose one or two of your large works.
Yeah.
Are on the other side in some way.
Yeah. Well, my intersection, I guess I have done one other sound piece, but most of my installations inside of a gallery or museum space would be video and audio. They have always been quite large. So even in 1988, my graduate thesis, I had a 10-meter video projection. But it's only since 2015 I started working on projections onto buildings known as media facade, or now I call them architectural projections. And I was not initially that interested in doing that type of work, primarily because my history was really more as a gallery artist, because what I was doing 40 years ago was basically painting and sculpture. But in South Korea, I was persuaded to be involved with an architectural projection of anything that I wanted. And I will confess, as a child, I was a pyromaniac. At 6 years old, I liked starting fires. So I decided that I would project fire. And this is in Daegu, which is the second largest city in South Korea. And if I remember correctly, it was about a 100-meter projection, but this building was like a series of cubes. So one thing that I had to do was to basically distort the video so it would be mapped appropriately on it. In that case, it was relatively easy for me to do because I didn't have to be involved with the technical aspects of projection. I simply had to distort the video according to a 3D model that they gave me. And the piece was called "For All the Museums That Forgot to Offer an Exhibition to Me." Now, to understand that, I think a lot of the Koreans, you need to have a pretty intricate understanding of English to understand the irony in that. But when we saw the piece, and I had sound also, suddenly I thought, this is very, very interesting. So I guess about 6 months later, I decided that I would propose a similar work for the opening of IZEA in Hong Kong in 2016. The difference was, though, that I decided I would handle the technical aspects of that, and that I created my own software that would actually control 4 high-definition projectors into a unified image, and this was on the Run Run Shaw Creative Media Center in Hong Kong. And again, the attraction to fire wasn't simply because of my roots as a young pyromaniac, but I was really attracted to the symbolism of fire. If we go back to ancient times, often substances were used as metaphors. Today, when we talk about symbols, typically we're referring to a geometrical form that is a metaphor for something. But in ancient times, we look at fire, we look at water, we look at smoke, and that was my attraction, that fire has been absolutely essential for the evolution of humanity. Without fire, we may have frozen to death. We would have no method to cook our food, and fire has been used to protect us as a weapon as well. So everyone enjoyed fire. So this piece, these flames were, I guess, if I remember correctly, about 56 meters high. And this was on a building designed by Daniel Libeskind, who's known for creating buildings that are all crooked. And this became very, very challenging technically, because when you project onto crooked surfaces or surfaces that are non-perpendicular, the image tends to stretch out. So what they had to do was to sort of unstretch it and put it back again. And I was very, very pleased with that. And it seems other people were as well. And then that piece was then shown at Ars Electronica in Austria, then it's shown in Saint-Brieuc in France. I proposed it to other cities, including here in Montreal, but there was a reluctance to show it here because the part of town where we wanted to show there had been some fires there. So fire, although it is has provided humanity the ability to survive, it also has killed people as well. So the fire piece became quite successful.
Before we were recording, you were also mentioning a software you were developing about 30 years ago, in some way related to what David Rokeby with the very nervous system was doing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So after working in engineering and telecommunications design for a few years, I then returned to university and got a fine arts degree, and I got a psychology degree, and spent my summers designing this telecommunications equipment. So I was a very well-funded art student. And at the end of that, I had discovered a graduate program at MIT in Boston that was combining art with technology, and that was in the Center for Advanced Visual Studies and the Media Lab, which was very new at that time. So these were probably, I would say, some of the first academic institutions that had artists exploring art and technology. So during that period, I started doing my first large video installations, which were controlled directly with the output of a computer, specifically the video and audio output. And then in, I guess it would have been around the end of 1987, I started incorporating interactivity to that, and specifically through a course by a composer named Todd McElver, which is specifically about interactive music, a course called Hyper Instruments. And the students were then paired with different composers. And the intention was that the students would create interactive music systems for these composer musicians. And my partner was George Lewis, and George was known for being a pioneer for interactive music systems. And I really didn't want to create a system that enabled music to control music. I was interested in music controlling video, so we were a good match. So I developed this software that would basically interpret the music coming in, and based on different rules would control interactive real-time video. We did a performance in the MIT Media Lab. I think it was about in May 1988. It was very stressful for me because I was used to being a gallery artist. So a gallery artist, sits in the back room while the artist out front. In this case, I'm in front of an audience. I remember being, quite stressed out of it. And technically it worked. It was a very surrealistic performance. I guess the imagery that most people remember is, I guess it would have been composited video of my arms and hands coming out of my eyes, which would have been shaking in synchronization with the music. So that became, at the time, I guess, one of my most published photos. And somehow news of this performance took off. I never realized how established George Lewis was. And by the next year, I was performing at New Music America in New York with George. And I estimate for the next 3 years, my time was really spent on developing that software, which is called Orpheus. So Orpheus became a complete application that allowed you to listen to the music, or specifically it would understand the music in a certain way that you could define. You could indicate you wanted the music to be categorized according to ranges of loudness, ranges of pitches, ranges of intervals. This is before Max MSP was really around. And then I started working with other musicians, but Orpheus really became my life. And that was the time when I was hired by this university, Concordia University. At the time, until about 1993, most of my work was these live performances of music controlled by video. In a way, I suppose this is the beginning of VJ culture, but it was a little different in that we were basically doing music live and video live. And then in '93, I decided to modify this system. Instead of the video being controlled by music, it began being controlled by sensors, by infrared sensors, ultrasonic sensors. And then that led to my transformation into more of an installation artist. Technically, it was the same system, but in this case, it was being controlled by the audience rather than by the musician. This work, though, really evolves completely from the work I was doing in engineering. My last positions there was as a human interface designer, that my task was to investigate and to come up with strategies for users to interact, in this case, computer-aided design equipment or telecommunications equipment. And my colleagues were mostly European psychologists. And that whole evolution of mine really came out of just a series of circumstances and interests that, in retrospect, it's sort of really a surprise that I ended up down this path. It was like one opportunity after another led me to be, I think at the time they were called cyber artists or electronic artists or multimedia artist. There's lots of names that go along with it, but that's sort of the history of how I ended up doing what I've been doing now for over 30 years.
Thank you so much, Don, for the time.
Okay, it was my pleasure.